Hi everyone, my name is Mayephu and I'm the chairperson of Tshwane Homelessness Forum, which is being constituted by all NGOs within the city that are working with homeless communities. But we also partner with universities, UP and UNISA, and the city of Tshwane. The World Homeless Day is an event that we've been doing for the past 5 years, since 2015, with our partners, UNISA, UP, and the city of Tshwane, after signing a social contract together to commit ourselves with regards to creating pathways for homeless people within the city. During the COVID-19 in March, there was a lockdown for the past 6 months, and we have been working with other partners to ensure that the homeless people finds accommodation that is decent, where they were able to get food to eat and a place to sleep, and also they'll be able to wash themselves and be healthy.
Good morning, Desiree. We're coming live to you from the Caledonian Stadium in Pretoria, where over 1,000 homeless people are housed here in tents provided by the Gauteng province.
When President Cyril Ramaphosa announced the national lockdown for COVID-19 on 24 March 2020, in his speech he said that temporary shelters had to be created for homeless people. This surfaced many fault lines in the city and offered new opportunities. No national policy on street homelessness exists. Only one province and 2 municipalities have a policy that addresses street homelessness. Street homelessness is invisible in urban governance and is wished away by urban neighborhoods. However, after President Cyril Ramaphosa's announcement, it gained new visibility during the national lockdown. Street homelessness is complex. No one-size-fits-all approach can work. COVID-19 taught the power of collaboration. It demonstrated the possibility of ending street homelessness for chronic populations. It emphasized the importance of policy, strategy, and investment at all levels of government. It showed how homelessness is a public health issue, a housing issue, and a psychosocial issue. It showed that facing homelessness is facing myself and facing the institutions that govern my city. During the national lockdown, street homelessness surfaced kindness in some and hard-heartedness in others. Municipalities responded to the issue in vastly different ways, some through bold collaboratives and others in highly contested ways. In many cities, the aftermath of the national lockdown are new policy and strategic conversations, the possibility of funding and bed spaces not available before, a preparedness to think innovatively about partnerships, responses to street homelessness and substance use that are not criminalizing vulnerable communities but centered on their humanity and dignity. We take you on a whirlwind tour of 6 cities and 6 responses. What you will hear is only the tip of the iceberg, and through the insights and voices of those we introduce you to. These are not the full stories. The layers are many and thick. But we see a crack, and in this conversation, we are inviting citizens to help in opening the crack even wider.
Talking to the interventions that we have implemented during the lockdown, with the first point being the gaps, the fault lines. My thinking is that the first gap was that the city by itself did not have established homeless shelters. And there was a lot of people who were staying in the streets, and it was a threat to the city that the people who are in the streets, in as much as everybody else needs to stay within their houses to avoid the spread of COVID-19, it meant that even those that are in the street homelessness needed to be in a secured place so that they can be taken care of and they can also be able to take care of themselves. So the gap for me there was that there were no institutionalized or established homeless shelters for the city. But also one important element also as we went on when the president announced the lockdown, and the decision was that even the homeless had to be accommodated in homeless shelters. It meant that there had to be quite a number of services that had to be provided. As the health department, we are responsible for the implementation of the drug and substance abuse response program within the city, and many of our clients has been the people who live in the streets, trying to intervene in their day-to-day lives so that we can be able to bring in integrity and improve the lives of the people so that they can find themselves in a better situation. But to be able to do that, it meant that the people had to be accommodated, firstly. And it came out that actually the city was not ready for that, and there were no specific accommodation places. Hence, at the first point, some of the places where the people were like at the Caledonian Stadium, which was not really a conducive space. And although as the city, we then had to take up an intervention and put up temporary tents so that people can be accommodated in a decent way. But one of the gaps that came with that also was that as and when the people get to stay in those temporary shelters, they will not be able to provide a service to themselves in terms of what they are used to. And one of the things that they were used to was the use of substances. And if they are not able to access the substances because the economy is not working and they are not in the space where they can be able to access whoever is a seller, it meant that they are going to face withdrawal symptoms. And those withdrawal symptoms came in a devastating way for them and for the officials of the city as they had to take care of the people.
The president made his initial announcement about the lockdown and specifically mentioned homeless people and the need for emergency shelters. I have to say, I was initially excited and then obviously a bit anxious. Excited because the homeless were the only marginalized group that got a special mention in that announcement. And we as the National Homeless Network had been lobbying in advance, expecting a lockdown, lobbying that there should be some recognition of the needs of the homeless. So whether it was because of our lobbying, who knows, but anyway, they got mentioned. Anxious because we had to do something. We had to provide emergency shelters for homeless people here in Durban. The response in Durban was remarkably quick and remarkably efficient. And that was because we already had in place a forum in which the key players were talking to each other, were learning to work together and building trust with each other. That means the municipality, NGOs, academics, corporates, and faith-based organizations. This was a group called the eThekwini Task Team on Homelessness. It had been set up by the previous deputy mayor about 2 years ago, not with a lot of energy under her, but had gained a lot more energy under the new deputy mayor, Belinda Scott, who came into office September of last year. So when this announcement was made, I think it was a Monday evening, by 6 o'clock the next morning, the deputy mayor was on the phone to me saying, let's get the task team assembled so we can work out how we can deliver emergency shelters. And between Tuesday morning and Friday evening, when the lockdown began, we managed to put together emergency shelters for 1,500 people in central Durban, separating men from women and separating those who were elderly, sick, or disabled from the general group. And it was possible to do that so quickly because effectively we had the combination of the expertise and the speediness of the NGOs, but also, to be fair, the resources and the money of the municipality. And that was really possible because the deputy mayor decided to give this, make it a major political priority and put her personal weight behind it. Now, of course, it wasn't all plain sailing. Our initial most obvious location was to use the huge Durban Exhibition Centre, which is a big, well-fenced area right in the heart of the city, lots of separate rooms, lots of covered areas, obviously lots of toilets and so on and so forth. And that seemed a perfect place to actually create the emergency shelters. And even though the Durban Exhibition Centre is owned by the municipality, they categorically refused to let us use it. Now, maybe in retrospect, they were right. We were planning for a 3-week lockdown. In the end, we ran the system for 13 weeks, and indeed parts of that system continue 6 months into COVID. But it was very frustrating that we had a solution right on our doorstep and we actually couldn't use it. What we ended up doing was creating for most people tents in parks, which were fenced off areas where people had indoor and outdoor space and access to toilets and ablutions and so on. But for the women and for the sick, elderly and disabled men and women, we had buildings that were brought online to use as shelters. I think we managed to do as much as we did because we had this very strong sense of shared vision and shared purpose. If I'm really honest, I think the municipal officials really didn't know what to do, and so they let the NGOs take the lead, and that's why we managed to get some things through that perhaps might not have happened under other circumstances. And we also had a number of things already in place. So, for example, the building which became the women's shelter was actually a municipal building that we had identified as the task team 18 months earlier as a potential women's shelter, and for 18 months, very little had happened apart from a bit of refurbishment. The emergency of the COVID lockdown meant we were able to bring that on stream straight away. In fact, a colleague of mine, a homeless colleague of mine on the task team, made the comment that we achieved in 3 days more than we'd achieved in the previous 3 years. So we were helped by the sense of urgency. We were helped, although in retrospect this may have turned out to be a bit of a problem. We were helped by this sense that, well, all money is available, so don't worry about budgets. I was a little, I have to say, surprised at how cavalier some of the budgeting was in that process. And we were also helped by the fact that Durban already has a very strong collaborative spirit between the different NGOs. So rather than the NGOs competing with each other to work on this, we were all working very collaboratively, one focusing on healthcare, one focusing on food, one focusing on... One of the things which certainly helped me through this whole period of lockdown and has helped our work in Durban has been part of a national homeless network. This is a network that we set up almost 3 years ago and has mostly been some informal conversations and an annual meeting. But because we had that group of people, again, already connected, during lockdown, we met virtually once a week, and it was a chance for us to sound off with each other, which is always useful, to hear what was going on in other cities, to learn from each other. And for example, in KZN, we built better links with both Richards Bay and Pietermaritzburg, who were having similar problems, obviously not so far from us, and we were able to reach out and help them. So having a network of people who knew each other, who could build trust with each other and could share information proved to be a really useful part of this whole strategy.
So what was pretty unique was we're an NGO, Hope on these streets. There were a number of NGOs that, as I started making phone calls to find out, you know, is there anything happening with the homeless? What are these shelters going to look like? I got in contact with a number of other NGOs as well. And before we knew it, with the municipality and out of that municipal meeting, we then all worked together to look at how things could go forward. So the municipality, our local Msunduzi municipality, King Shetshwayo, they supplied a venue, they supplied the security, they brought in cleaners, and as we met regularly, at least once a week, to look at what are some of the running logistics of a temporary shelter. Key was Department of Health. It was great. It was a little bit slow in the beginning to get our Department of Health because they were facing so many other greater demands. And so we had a need within to look after the medical needs of those in the shelter. So for instance, a lot of the guys who are on our streets here in Richards Bay are on drugs. And so they had withdrawals. And so Department of Health then came in quite regularly, bringing in mobile clinics, sending ambulances when we needed to, as we helped people get off their withdrawals. The NGOs in the beginning started feeding those in the shelters, but then after about 2 weeks, Department of Social Development started feeding. They've actually been feeding and getting caterers in three 3 times a day for the past 6 months. And so that's really been great to see. They've also helped with counseling, trying to find families. And then the NGOs in the whole process have taken over the oversight of the shelters. We've got somebody at our men's shelter here in Richards Bay. We've got a team that are looking after the ladies' shelter, just going in, making sure that spirits are uplifted for those who are staying in the shelters during lockdown, as well as providing clothing. We've been trying to do some skills development, selling earrings, upcycling of furniture. So a number of things have been going on. And I must say there's been quite a few success stories. Day 2 of our shelters, we had 90 people. I think a lot of it was fear-based. A lot of those who were homeless, police were going around saying, listen, the army are going to come in the next couple of weeks and they're going to remove everybody. Everybody has to be in some form of a place of safety or shelter. And so second day, we went right up to 90 men. And getting all these men into our shelter. And we know there were many more in the bushes, but we realized after 2 or 3 days, they realized the police weren't coming for them. So a lot of them left just due to drug addictions. They couldn't deal with the cravings before departments of health could be involved. But some of the successes out of the collaboration was for about 5 months, we've had 35 to 40 people stay permanently in the shelters who have come clean. It's been great to hear stories where, as people, those who are on the streets have got out of their addictions, we've seen them, can they go home? The National Homeless Network, for us who have never run a shelter, we've been involved with the homeless in terms of feeding, but actually being responsible for people's lives, 24 hours. Being part of those meetings, I didn't give much, but I received a lot. Just hearing some of the discussions, also for those who had been dealing with the homeless for a long time, where they were able to actually give insights. They were dealing with struggles that we hadn't even thought about. And being able to share solutions to some of the stuff which is very elementary. And I was able to ask some questions and they were saying, yeah, I remember that happening and this is how we did and this is some of the things that we've discovered.
We hosted the South African National Network for Homelessness last year here in Bloemfontein. And one of the reasons we opted to host it was, again, to get the whole issue of homelessness a bit more into the public space. And it was a good meeting. Not only for those that came from other cities, but also of people, local participants we could get involved from other organizations, from the faith community, some counselors were there. So I was very excited at that stage that we can take the next steps and form a bit of an organization. But, since November till March, beginning of March, we didn't pick up the ball fast enough, and then the whole COVID lockdown happened. So it was very good. It helped us, but the whole COVID lockdown experience just reminded me and others that we must be intentional of building networks also in our city. Otherwise, it's not just going to happen on its own. I believe during this whole COVID thing, even with the police. So again, as I said, even when they closed our soup kitchen down, and they were never nasty, even though they threatened to arrest us. But they were never nasty. Even one of the brigadiers even said, Pastor, we need you more than you need us, but you're contravening the regulations. And then at times they want to say, but there are no homeless on the street. They have to be in the shelters. And I said, no, they are there. They're coming to eat. They're not all in the shelters. So it just, hopefully for some of the police officers and some of the officialdom, because they are good people. I mean, when the system is broken, doesn't mean all the people in the systems are broken. There's some real possibilities to go forward. So our challenge is to take, in this crazy times, to take the best out of it, and how do we move forward? But we have to be intentional. It's not going to happen on its own.
I think the end of March, when the lockdown began, there was a lot of frustration amongst the NGOs. We were keen to get involved, but we were struggling to get hold of the city. But by the end of April, as Mary said, we were able to start a task team. I think the city during that first month, concentrated on turning recreation centres into temp shelters, and they also established the Wembley tented village. And then in the NGOs and FBOs, their response was to establish temporary shelters with permission from the city of Johannesburg. So during the lockdown period, which I guess would have gone deep into April, May, June, there were, to my knowledge, 4 temporary shelters established in the Randburg area, sort of northern suburbs, Johannesburg area. I think, though, that the feeling was that, at most, only about 1,000 people were accommodated, which was way short of the 15,000 people that were estimated to be homeless in Johannesburg. I think on the sort of positive side that we did establish the terms of reference, and needs were identified, needs for project manager research, something to somehow monitor what was going on at the different projects, as well as to start to look to the future. But that only really became something probably in the last 2 months. I just think that we're at a critical point in Johannesburg. I can't, talk for other places. We desperately, the window of opportunity to obtain buildings for NGOs, in my opinion, is narrowing or closing. In 6 months' time, it could well be that, we've all moved on from COVID, or we've learned to manage COVID, and suddenly the homelessness issue and other issues are not so important. So I think it's important in the next 6 months that we apply the right amount of pressure on the city to start releasing some properties that could be used for, valuable social projects. So I think if I had to put in a nutshell, that is our number one priority in Joburg, to get the people who guard the properties to release those properties.
As a member of the National Homeless Network, I think it is very important to firstly point out continually to the City of Johannesburg officials that the actual response to homelessness was as a result of our writing to the President ahead of his 23rd of March speech, and then declared in the Disaster Management Act, and that everything flowed from there. So the fact that we were actually proactive and advocated for the homeless, I think that was incredible. Being part of the national task team and having the weekly meetings gave one a lot of support, because I think while we weren't intending to be a support structure, we were trying to learn from each other. It became a very useful support structure to deal with frustrations at the local level, because one could see the bigger picture. One could see that this was happening here, and these were the struggles that were happening in another area of the country. And the fact that we were starting to look at like Gauteng policy and working together at Gauteng level, and also looking at what others could do.
During the COVID period specifically, there was, the most important thing was actually to keep people safe. The government promised, the city promised from the beginning that they will assist to have permanent shelters at the end of the period. But because the city was under administration at that time, and it was difficult, most of the decisions were not easily made, because the people who were supposed to make those decisions were either suspended, or they were, like if it's under administration, it was being managed by the province. And as a result, policy came into the fray here. Therefore, policy always becomes an issue in addressing homelessness in the city. And so during this period as well, it became clear that it is policy that is always a stumbling block in addressing homelessness. I'm not very optimistic. I am, for the short period I've been working on with homelessness in the city, I have realized that the political will is not in the right place. From time to time, it's very easy to talk and make promises, but when it comes to actual delivering on the promises that were made to the people, the powers that be is very easy for them to pull back. And the community-based organizations will not be able to do it alone.
The agenda that I have is a straightforward one, to continue my engagements with the provincial minister to ensure that within the next few months or year or so, we identify hard buildings that can be converted into proper, specific and tailored shelters for our homeless communities, to ensure that we work with stakeholders and service providers who are committed to developing and supporting our homeless communities in these facilities that are made available to these service providers. But very importantly, to ensure that the conversation that we're having at the moment and the development of the strategy that is taking place at the moment involves all of our stakeholders, from forums to shelters to service providers to homeless people, so that at the end of this strategy development, we have a world-class strategy that speaks clearly to the roles of all stakeholders and how these stakeholders, programs, infrastructure, and resources fit together to decrease the number of homeless people in our city. And I hope that it is a strategy that would be able to give guidance to this very same process in any number of cities in our country.
My vision and hope for homelessness, talking as someone who was homeless for 11 years himself, is having passion-driven social workers dealing with homeless people, seeing the system working the way it has to work. If someone is homeless, it's because their lives was altered in an unfavorable way, and he just needs a place. He's like in a desert. He just needs an oasis where he can relax, refresh, correct, and go back into society. From all of this, the way the whole world has came in, there's a lot of reporters who came to the areas in Tshwane from Spain. Some were coming from Belgium. The Australian radio the other time did confirm about the Caledonia thing and stuff. So there's a lot of attention now, or spotlight that's now given to the homeless people who've been in the dark but still in the light. So my vision is seeing transit shelters, seeing overnight shelters being there in each and every region in the city of Tshwane, where you have this one dealing with maybe women empowerment or something like that. But this is just a wishful way that I think my vision will put at that. But yeah, I'm when coming to this one, everyone has ideas and is envisioning on if you are given the right tools to show what we have to do to make everything to be at par per se. I know it's a fairy tale wish to say for everyone to be on the same level. It's an ecosystem. We cannot all be on an equal level, but we can strive to reach on that one. Minimize the misfortunes, minimize the injustices, minimize the cover-ups, minimize minimize a lot of things.